The sun had barely set as the Lopez family drove through the narrow, winding roads that led to their new home. The dense trees of the Philippine countryside loomed like ancient guardians, casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. They had heard the stories, of course, about the haunted village, the forgotten curse that had plagued it for generations. But they hadn't really believed them. Not at first, anyway. They were just stories, old wives' tales passed down from the elders of the village. What could they possibly have to do with them? They were just a family looking for a fresh start, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The promise of peace, tranquility, and a life away from the constant noise had drawn them in. But as the road grew darker, twisting and turning with no sign of civilization in sight, a subtle tension began to creep in, like a cold draft slipping through the cracks of the house. Marissa Lopez, the mother, glanced at her husband, Rodel, who was driving with a calm expression on his face, trying to reassure her with his steady presence. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something ominous lurking in the air. It wasn't just the isolation that unsettled her. It was the silence, the kind of silence that felt too heavy. "Are we almost there?" she asked, her voice breaking the uneasy quiet. "Just a few more minutes," Rodel replied. He sounded confident, but Marissa could hear the slight tremor in his voice, and she wasn't sure if it was just from the long drive or something else. Her two children, Luis and Carmen, sat quietly in the back seat, their faces pressed against the windows as they gazed out at the thick, misty landscape. They had been excited at first, eager to leave the city behind and start anew. But now, there was a strange unease settling over them too. Carmen, who was only 8, clutched her stuffed bear tighter as they passed a small weathered sign that read, "Welcome to Barangay Melis, a place of peace." Peace. The irony wasn't lost on Marissa. A few moments later, the car finally pulled up to their new home, a large, dilapidated house at the edge of the village, tucked away behind overgrown trees and a long, crooked driveway. It had been empty for years, a remnant of the past, but it had been perfect for them. Cheap, spacious, and secluded, the kind of place they'd always dreamed of. But now that they were here, Marissa couldn't help but feel a chill creeping down her spine. The house seemed to loom over them, its darkened windows staring back like empty eyes. "This is it," Rodel said, parking the car in front of the house. His voice sounded a little hollow, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as Marissa. "It's a bit run down, but it's got character, right?" Marissa didn't respond. She just stared at the house, her breath caught in her throat. There was something about it, something that felt wrong. But she pushed the thought away. It was just nerves. She couldn't let her imagination run wild. This was their new life, their new beginning. The children were already out of the car, running toward the front door, eager to explore their new home. Luis, the older of the two, was already laughing, while Carmen held tightly to her stuffed bear. Marissa hesitated, then stepped out of the car, clutching her bag, and walked toward the house. Rodel followed her, carrying a box. "Come on, let's get settled in. We've got a lot of work to do." The door creaked as they opened it, revealing a dusty interior with faded wallpaper peeling off the walls. The air inside smelled old, like forgotten memories. The windows were boarded up, letting in only slivers of light. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each step echoing through the emptiness. It felt like the house hadn't been touched in decades. "This place is a mess," Rodel said, setting the box down. "But with a little cleaning, we can make it feel like home." Marissa nodded, trying to muster some optimism. "We'll make it work. We always do." But as the night fell and the house settled into silence, that creeping feeling didn't go away. It only grew stronger. As the family began to unpack, they noticed the house's strange features. narrow, dark hallways that seemed to go on forever. Windows that wouldn't open, and doors that creaked and moaned even when no one was near them. It was as if the house had a life of its own, breathing in rhythm with them. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and every time Marissa glanced over her shoulder, she thought she saw something move out of the corner of her eye. But when she turned around, nothing was there. The sun had barely set as the Lopez family drove through the narrow, winding roads that led to their new home. The dense trees of the Philippine countryside loomed like ancient guardians, casting long, twisted shadows on the ground. They had heard the stories, of course, about the haunted village, the forgotten curse that had plagued it for generations. But they hadn't really believed them. Not at first, anyway. They were just stories, old wives' tales passed down from the elders of the village. What could they possibly have to do with them? They were just a family looking for a fresh start, far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The promise of peace, tranquility, and a life away from the constant noise had drawn them in. But as the road grew darker, twisting and turning with no sign of civilization in sight, a subtle tension began to creep in, like a cold draft slipping through the cracks of the house. Marissa Lopez, the mother, glanced at her husband, Rodel, who was driving with a calm expression on his face, trying to reassure her with his steady presence. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something ominous lurking in the air. It wasn't just the isolation that unsettled her. It was the silence, the kind of silence that felt too heavy. "Are we almost there?" she asked, her voice breaking the uneasy quiet. "Just a few more minutes," Rodel replied. He sounded confident, but Marissa could hear the slight tremor in his voice, and she wasn't sure if it was just from the long drive or something else. Her two children, Luis and Carmen, sat quietly in the back seat, their faces pressed against the windows as they gazed out at the thick, misty landscape. They had been excited at first, eager to leave the city behind and start anew, but now there was a strange unease settling over them too. Carmen, who was only 8, clutched her stuffed bear tighter as they passed a small weathered sign that read, "Welcome to Barangay Melis, a place of peace." Peace. The irony wasn't lost on Marissa. A few moments later, the car finally pulled up to their new home. A large, dilapidated house at the edge of the village, tucked away behind overgrown trees and a long, crooked driveway. It had been empty for years, a remnant of the past, but it had been perfect for them. Cheap, spacious, and secluded, the kind of place they'd always dreamed of. But now that they were here, Marissa couldn't help but feel a chill creeping down her spine. The house seemed to loom over them, its darkened windows staring back like empty eyes. "This is it," Rodel said, parking the car in front of the house. His voice sounded a little hollow, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as Marissa. "It's a bit run down, but it's got character, right?" Marissa didn't respond. She just stared at the house, her breath caught in her throat. There was something about it, something that felt wrong. But she pushed the thought away. It was just nerves. She couldn't let her imagination run wild. This was their new life, their new beginning. The children were already out of the car, running toward the front door, eager to explore their new home. Luis, the older of the two, was already laughing. While Carmen held tightly to her stuffed bear, Marissa hesitated, then stepped out of the car, clutching her bag, and walked toward the house. Rodel followed her, carrying a box. "Come on, let's get settled in. We've got a lot of work to do." The door creaked as they opened it, revealing a dusty interior with faded wallpaper peeling off the walls. The air inside smelled old, like forgotten memories. The windows were boarded up, letting in only slivers of light. The floorboards groaned under their weight, each step echoing through the emptiness. It felt like the house hadn't been touched in decades. "This place is a mess," Rodell said, setting the box down. "But with a little cleaning, we can make it feel like home." Marissa nodded, trying to muster some optimism. "We'll make it work. We always do." But as the night fell and the house settled into silence, that creeping feeling didn't go away. It only grew stronger. As the family began to unpack, they noticed the house's strange features: narrow, dark hallways that seemed to go on forever, windows that wouldn't open, and doors that creaked and moaned even when no one was near them. It was as if the house had a life of its own, breathing in rhythm with them. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and every time Marissa glanced over her shoulder, she thought she saw something move out of the corner of her eye. But when she turned around, nothing was there. Luis and Carmen had already claimed their rooms, the two of them each finding comfort in the cold, drafty spaces. Marissa and Rodell, however, decided to sleep in the master bedroom on the second floor. It was bigger, with an old four-poster bed and an antique wardrobe. Despite the house's oddities, it was still beautiful in its own way. That night, as they tried to fall asleep, a soft whisper seemed to float through the air. It was so faint that Marissa thought she was imagining it, at first. But then it came again, this time louder, as if it was right next to her ear. "Help me! Help me!" Her heart skipped a beat. She turned to Rodell, but he was sound asleep, his back to her. The whisper came again, this time more insistent. "Help me!" Marissa's breath caught in her throat. She pulled the covers tightly around her and closed her eyes, trying to ignore it. Maybe it was just the wind, she told herself. Maybe it was just the old house settling. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. The next morning, things only got worse. Carmen came running into their room, her face pale and tear-streaked. "Mom! Dad! Luis! Luis is gone!" Marissa's heart stopped. "What do you mean, gone?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "He's not in his room. His bed is empty," Carmen cried, clutching her stuffed bear. Rodell shot up from the bed, his face ashen. "He's probably just hiding." "Luis! Luis!" he called, rushing out of the room. Marissa followed closely behind, her mind racing. This wasn't possible. Luis couldn't just disappear. They searched the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. Luis was gone. They checked the entire house, top to bottom, but Luis was nowhere to be found. The sun had barely risen when the village elders arrived. They were older men and women, wearing solemn expressions, their faces drawn and weary. When they heard the news, they didn't seem shocked, just resigned. "Your family is cursed," one of the elders said, his voice low and grave. "This house, this village, they are haunted. The souls of the lost have been waiting for someone to awaken them, and you've done just that." Marissa and Rodell exchanged confused looks. "What are you talking about?" Rodell asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. The elder took a deep breath. "There's a curse on this land, an ancient curse. A family once lived here long ago. They were part of something evil. They performed a ritual, and in return, they were cursed to wander the earth forever. Their souls never finding peace." Marissa felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "Are you saying this is happening because we moved here?" "Yes," the elder said, his eyes narrowing. "Your son, he was chosen. He was the one who awoke them." Suddenly the house creaked. The floorboards groaned, and Marissa turned to see a shadow flicker at the end of the hall. Her heart raced. Something was moving. Something was watching them. A faint, eerie voice echoed from the darkness. "Come to me." Luis was still gone, and the whispers, the calls, had only just begun. "I understand your request, but producing such a lengthy narrative with the specific elements you've requested in one go would result in a highly complex and detailed story. Since this platform is limited by character constraints, I'll begin the continuation of the story from the previous part, focusing on maintaining the tension and eerie atmosphere. I'll aim for a significant portion, though it may not fully reach the 9,000 characters in one message. Here's the continuation. Marissa's breath quickened as the elder's words echoed in her ears. Your son, he was chosen. The words seemed to linger in the room, growing heavier with each passing second, pressing down on her chest like an invisible weight. The elder's face remained impassive, his eyes locked on her with an unnerving intensity, as if he had seen this before, countless times. He had seen families like hers fall victim to whatever evil haunted this place. Rodell stepped forward, his voice sharp and full of disbelief. Chosen for what? What do you mean, chosen? His hands were trembling slightly, betraying the calm exterior he was desperately trying to maintain. Where is our son? What have you done to him? The elder raised a hand, silencing Rodell's outburst. His gnarled fingers trembled slightly, but his voice remained unwavering. The curse is old, ancient. It has waited for generations, lying dormant, until someone foolish enough to disturb it comes along. He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. Your son, Luis, is not gone. He is trapped, just like the others before him. The spirits, the lost souls of this village, they will claim him, just as they claimed those before him. Marissa felt a cold knot form in her stomach. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. No, this can't be happening. We can't lose him. We just found this place. It was supposed to be a fresh start for us. The elder's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a brief second. His gaze turned toward the house, a distant, haunted look crossing his face. There is no escape, he murmured. The curse is not something you can run from. The lost souls of this place are bound to the land, and once they choose, there is no going back. Rodell turned to Marissa, his face pale with terror. We need to find Luis now, he said, his voice firm. But the fear in his eyes was undeniable. But Marissa, still shaking, couldn't move. The words the elder had spoken were sinking into her, gnawing at her mind. What do we do? She whispered, her voice trembling. How do we stop this? The elder's eyes darkened. You cannot stop it, he said, his tone grave. Once the curse has been awakened, the only way to break it is to make a sacrifice, a blood offering. A life must be given in exchange for another. Marissa recoiled, her heart racing. A sacrifice? What kind of barbaric ritual is that? The only kind that will end the curse, the elder replied, his voice soft but deadly serious. It must be done willingly, or else the souls will never be at peace. And your son, his eyes darkened further. He will become one of them, forever. Rodell grabbed Marissa by the shoulders, shaking her gently. We can't give up. We have to find a way, anything. We can't let Luis become one of those things. Marissa's mind was racing. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't, no, she wouldn't, accept what the elder was saying. It was unthinkable, unimaginable. She couldn't lose her son. Not like this. She couldn't. But deep down, a cold sense of dread was settling in. The elder's words rang in her mind, haunting her. The souls are waiting. Suddenly, a low, guttural scream echoed from within the house, a sound so primal, so full of terror, that it froze Marissa's blood in her veins. It was unmistakable. It was Luis. Rodell turned to run, but the elder held out his hand, stopping him. Do not go into the house. Not yet, he said, his voice like ice. The spirits are restless. If you go in now, you will never leave. But Rodell had already broken free. His eyes were wide with fear, and he wasn't listening anymore. He ran toward the house, his footsteps loud in the eerie stillness. Marissa hesitated, then followed him. The wind began to pick up, rustling the trees, and for a moment she thought she heard whispers, soft, almost indistinguishable, but growing louder with each passing second. It was as if the very air was alive with the voices of the dead. They reached the house, the door creaking open of its own accord, as if welcoming them into the darkness. The moment they stepped inside, the temperature dropped. It was cold, unnaturally so. Their breath hung in the air like mist, and the shadows seemed to shift and writhe in the corners of the room. "Luis!" Rodel shouted, his voice echoing through the empty house. There was no answer. "Luis, where are you?" Marissa followed him through the dark hallways, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of dust that covered the floor. The house seemed even larger now, darker and more oppressive, its walls closing in around them as if it were alive, feeding on their fear. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling. They reached the staircase leading to the upper floors. The air was thick with tension, and Marissa could feel something watching them, something waiting. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to leave before it was too late, but she couldn't abandon her son. Not like this. They ascended the stairs, the wooden steps creaking under their weight, and reached the top floor. The door to Luis's room was wide open, the faint sound of sobbing coming from within. Marissa's heart leapt into her throat. "Luis!" she called, her voice trembling. "Luis, it's Mom. Are you in there?" The sobbing stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, from the darkness within, a voice, soft and haunting, whispered, "Help me." It was Luis's voice. Without thinking, Marissa rushed forward, but Rodel grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Don't," he whispered urgently. "Something's wrong. Don't go in there." But Marissa didn't listen. She wrenched her arm free and stepped into the room, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might burst. The room was cold, the air thick with a sense of dread. The walls seemed to close in on her, and for a moment she thought she saw figures moving in the shadows, shapes that didn't belong. She turned to Rodel, but he was no longer behind her. In the corner of the room, there was only darkness. "Luis!" she called again, her voice barely a whisper. The room seemed to stretch before her, endless and suffocating. She could see a figure at the far corner, hunched over, its back to her. It was too dark to make out any details, but the shape was unmistakable. The figure turned, and for a split second, Marissa thought it was Luis. But then she saw the eyes, empty, hollow, black voids staring at her, and she froze, terror gripping her heart. The thing that had once been her son was no longer human. It was a creature, something twisted, its body gaunt and skeletal, its mouth dripping with some dark substance, its lips twisted into a sickening grin. "Mom!" the creature rasped, its voice an unnatural, guttural imitation of Luis's. "Help me!" The darkness in the room thickened, and Marissa staggered back, gasping for air. The creature stepped forward, its fingers long and sharp, reaching for her. She turned to run, but the room seemed to stretch on forever, the walls closing in, trapping her in a nightmare. She couldn't escape. Suddenly, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder, and she spun around to find Rodel standing behind her. His face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. "We need to get out of here," he said urgently, grabbing her by the arm. "Now!" They turned and ran, but the house seemed alive, the walls closing in, the doors slamming shut, trapping them in its grip. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. The spirits, those lost souls, were closing in. Marissa's heart raced as they made their way back down the stairs, but she could hear footsteps behind them, echoing through the halls, growing louder and louder with every passing second. They were coming. The doors to the outside were locked, the windows sealed shut. The house had become a prison, and the curse had already begun to claim them. The room had grown impossibly dark, the shadows stretching further and further, as though they were alive and hungry. Every creak of the floorboards beneath their feet sent a shiver down Marissa's spine. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, and as they ran down the hallway, it felt as though the house itself was closing in on them, pulling them deeper into its suffocating embrace. Rodelle grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the front door, but the heavy, oppressive silence that had filled the house was broken by a low, guttural growl from somewhere deep within the darkness. It echoed through the hallways, reverberating off the walls, and in that moment, Marissa realized they weren't alone. Whatever had taken Luis was not finished. It was still hunting them. "Rodelle!" she gasped, her heart racing. "We need to get out, now!" The air grew colder still, and Marissa could see her breath misting in front of her as they made their way toward the door. But every time they moved, it felt like they were being watched, like 1,000 unseen eyes were upon them. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was the spirits of the lost souls, restless, trapped in this place, feeding off their fear. The door was locked. The heavy bolt that had once seemed like a secure barrier was now an insurmountable obstacle, the key nowhere in sight. Rodelle tugged at the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Help me!" Rodelle shouted, his voice echoing in the empty house. But the house remained eerily quiet, as though it was mocking them, daring them to try and escape. Marissa turned back toward the hallway, the darkness pressing in on her. She could hear it now, soft whispers, faint voices that seemed to drift from the very walls themselves. "Help me. Come to me." It was like a song, a lullaby sung by the lost souls, their voices hollow, desperate and mournful. They were close. They were too close. "Luis," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Where are you? Please come back." But there was no answer. Only the whispers. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and Marissa could see her breath fogging in front of her. A cold wind swept through the hallway, rushing past them with an unnatural force. The door rattled on its hinges as if something or someone was trying to get through. In a desperate panic, Marissa rushed to the window, pressing her palms against the glass. The view outside had once been serene, peaceful, the village bathed in soft golden light. Now it was a twisted, bleak landscape. The trees swayed in the wind like skeletal fingers, and the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet as though the land itself was alive, restless, yearning for something. Rodelle pushed past her, his face twisted with fear. "We need to leave. We have to get out of here," he muttered, more to himself than to Marissa. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit that no longer seemed possible. It was then that the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were everywhere, surrounding them, drowning out all other sounds. The floor creaked beneath their feet, and as Marissa turned, she saw something that made her blood run cold. From the shadows at the end of the hallway, a figure emerged. Tall, gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long, dragging itself toward them with a sickeningly slow, deliberate movement. Marissa's heart stopped. The figure was dressed in ragged, old clothes, its face obscured by the darkness. But there was something unmistakably familiar about it. The way it moved, the way it dragged itself across the floor. It was Luis. But it wasn't Luis anymore. Not fully. His eyes were black, hollow voids, his skin stretched taut over his bones, his body gaunt and twisted. His mouth opened in a soundless scream, his lips pulling back to reveal jagged, uneven teeth. And though he still bore the form of their son, there was no humanity left in him, only an empty vessel, consumed by whatever evil had claimed this house long ago. "Luis," Marissa whispered, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face as she reached out to him, her heart torn in two. "Please, no, please come back." But the thing that had once been her son only stepped forward, its black eyes staring into hers. And then, the whispering started again. It wasn't Luis's voice. It was the voices of the other spirits, the lost souls that roamed this forsaken house. And they were calling to her now, beckoning her into the darkness. "Help us! Help us!" they chanted, over and over, the words blending into one dissonant, terrifying harmony. "No," Marissa whispered, her body trembling with fear. "No, I won't. I won't let you take me." But it was already too late. The figure lunged at her, and though she tried to step back, her legs wouldn't move. The air around her thickened, choking her as if invisible hands were tightening their grip around her throat. She could feel the coldness of the thing's touch, the icy fingers dragging down her skin, leaving a trail of frost in their wake. She gasped for breath, but it was like the very air had been stolen from her lungs. Rodell was screaming, trying to pull her away, but the darkness was closing in around them. The house seemed to grow larger, its walls pressing in from every side. The spirits were all around them now, swirling, howling in unearthly voices, their forms like shadowy tendrils that reached out and wrapped around them, binding them to the cursed land. And then, through the chaos, through the cacophony of whispers and screams, Marissa heard a voice, a clear, strong voice, cut through the din. It was Luis, or at least, it sounded like him. "Mom! Dad!" Marissa's heart stopped. She turned toward the voice, her eyes wide with hope. The figure standing before her. No, it wasn't Luis. It couldn't be. It was still that twisted, monstrous version of him. But there, behind the creature's hollow eyes, she saw something. A flicker of recognition. A spark of the sun she had lost. "Luis!" she cried out, her voice choked with emotion. She reached out, her hand trembling as it approached the creature. The thing let out a screech, a terrible sound that seemed to rip through the very air. But Marissa didn't stop. She had to reach him. She had to save him. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. The air grew still. For a fleeting moment, the house fell silent. And then, the ground shook. The walls trembled, the windows rattled, and the very foundation of the house groaned under the strain. The spirits screamed in fury, the darkness swirling around them in a frenzied dance. Marissa stumbled back, her eyes wide with terror. The room was shaking, the floor splitting open beneath her feet, and the creature, Luis, was writhing, convulsing, its body twisting in unnatural ways as if it were being torn apart. "Mom! Dad!" Luis's voice cried out again, but it was distorted, twisted by the screams of the lost souls. And then, a light. A soft, white light appeared in the distance, faint at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. It illuminated the darkness, casting away the shadows. And as the light grew brighter, the spirits screamed, their forms dissipating like smoke in the wind. The creature that had once been Luis vanished into the light, its body disintegrating, its cries fading into nothing. The light grew blinding, and Marissa closed her eyes, shielding her face with her arms. When she opened her eyes again, she was standing outside the house. The sun was rising, casting a warm golden glow over the land. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, were now calm, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The village looked peaceful again. It looked normal. But Luis was gone. And though the curse had been broken, the price had been paid. Marissa and Rodell stood in the middle of the road, their faces pale and haggard, their bodies shaking with exhaustion. They had escaped the house, but at what cost? The spirits were gone. The curse had lifted, but the memory of what had happened, of what they had lost, would never leave them. Luis was gone. The wind had picked up as Marissa and Rodel stood there, alone in the clearing, the remnants of the haunted house now behind them. Their breath came in short, shallow gasps, the adrenaline still coursing through their veins. The light of dawn, pale and uncertain, bathed the village in a soft glow. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, now appeared strangely serene, as though they had never borne witness to the horrors that had unfolded in their midst. It almost seemed like the world had returned to normal. Almost. But it wasn't normal. It couldn't be. Not after everything they had seen, everything they had lost. Luis was gone. Their son. Their flesh and blood. Vanished, absorbed into the very darkness that had haunted this place for generations. Marissa clutched her chest as if trying to hold her heart together, but the emptiness gnawed at her. The curse, the ritual, the twisted creatures, the spirits, they were all gone now, erased from the physical world by the mysterious light. But the feeling of loss lingered, an unbearable weight that threatened to pull her down into a void from which there was no return. She had lost her son, and nothing could undo that. "Is he gone?" she whispered, the words coming out like a soft, broken prayer, as if asking for a miracle she knew would never come. Rodel didn't answer immediately. His face was ashen, his expression hollow. He had lost his son too. The child who had once run to him with laughter in his eyes, the boy who had been the center of their world. And now there was nothing left but the painful memory of a time when their lives had been whole, when they had been a family. The silence stretched between them like an impenetrable fog, suffocating every attempt at comfort. We have to go," Rodel said finally, his voice hoarse, cracked from the terror they had just endured. He took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We can't stay here. We can't let what happened keep us trapped in this place." Marissa nodded slowly, her mind still spinning with everything that had transpired. The light, the curse, the spirits that had screamed for her soul. The voices were fading now, but their echo remained in her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the house, the land, and the souls were still watching them, waiting. As they walked down the path toward the village, the weight of their loss seemed to press down on them, and the quiet became unbearable. The villagers, who had once looked at them with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, now ignored them. The air was thick with a strange, unsettling calm. It felt like the world had shifted, like something fundamental had been broken. Yet no one seemed to notice. They had no idea of the horrors that had played out in the shadows of their homes, and that, more than anything, terrified Marissa. The village, with its quiet streets and worn-out buildings, felt like an illusion, a shell of normalcy covering up something much darker beneath the surface. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong, that the curse wasn't truly broken, that something had followed them. The whispers, faint as they were, seemed to cling to her every step. The same whispers she had heard in the house, the same ones that had tormented her before. "Help us. You must help us." Rodel stopped suddenly, pulling Marissa to a halt beside him. He was looking at someone really, standing at the edge of the village square. The figure was hooded, shrouded in shadow, and though the air around it seemed still, there was a movement to its presence that made Marissa's skin crawl. It wasn't a person, not entirely. It was something else. She could feel it. She gasped, her breath caught in her throat as the figure slowly turned its head, its face hidden beneath the hood. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, vanished into the mist that clung to the edges of the square. Gone, as if it had never been there at all. "Did you see that?" Marissa whispered, gripping Rodel's arm as if she might collapse from sheer terror. "Who was that?" Rodel didn't answer at first. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief, and his body stiff with fear. He had seen it too, that much was certain. But he was unwilling to speak it aloud, unwilling to acknowledge that the terror wasn't over. It was still there, just beneath the surface, waiting to consume them both. "We need to leave." "Now," Rodell said, his voice low, urgent. He began to pull Marissa away, urging her forward, but Marissa felt the cold fingers of dread tighten around her heart. Something was wrong. They made their way out of the village, passing the familiar streets, the houses where they had once lived, where they had thought they were safe. The road out of the village was narrow, bordered by dense trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. It was here, on this road, that the whispers grew louder, more distinct. She could hear them now. "Come back! Help us!" Marissa felt her legs turn to jelly. She stopped, her eyes scanning the trees, the shadows that danced between the trunks. The wind had stopped. The world had fallen silent, and in that silence, the whispers were growing louder. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and the overwhelming sense of dread that had followed them since the moment they had entered the house surged back, stronger than ever. "Rodell," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something is wrong." Rodell, too, seemed to feel it. He stopped walking, his eyes darting around the darkened path, searching for the source of the sound. There, in the trees. There, just beyond the reach of the faint light from the village, something moved. He grabbed Marissa's arm, pulling her to him, his eyes wide with panic. "We need to go, now!" But it was too late. The ground beneath them shook violently, the earth quaking like a living thing. Marissa screamed, her voice lost in the roar of the wind that suddenly howled through the trees. The shadows in the forest seemed to twist and writhe, as though the trees themselves were alive, their branches reaching for them like fingers eager to grasp and pull them into the darkness. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening cacophony, and Marissa stumbled back, her vision blurring, her chest heaving with panic. She could hear voices now, all around her, so many voices, whispering, crying, begging. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, clutching her head in her hands as the voices grew louder, the world spinning around her. She tried to scream, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. Rodell was beside her, trying to hold her steady, his face contorted with fear. But he too was beginning to fade. His form wavered in and out of focus, as if he were slipping into the very darkness that surrounded them. "No! No!" she gasped, reaching for him, but he was already gone, swallowed by the shadows. The last thing she heard, the final thing that shattered her sanity, was the voice of her son. "Mom, I'm sorry. I couldn't escape. They are coming." Then the darkness consumed her.